On the 10th of February, the Daily Mail ran the following headline, and I quote, "Inside Britain's Trump-style mass deportation flights, as 19,000 illegal immigrants are kicked out since Labour took power," end quote. And I have to admit, when I first saw this headline, I had to give it a second take. 19,000 illegal migrants deported, repatriated, or remigrated, whatever you want to call it. Sounds good. But let's break these figures down and take a closer look at the article in question in order to make sure we're not celebrating too quickly. So let's start with the raw figures. In the time since Labour took power on July the 5th of 2024, up to January the 31st of this year, the total number of deportations has hit 18,987. And this number is comprised of failed asylum seekers, foreign criminals, and illegal migrants. Of that figure, 5,074 of those deportations are what are classed as enforced returns. These are people who were forcefully deported. The remaining number, over 2/3 of the total, left voluntarily. This number is comprised of migrants who did not have permission to stay in Britain and received payments of up to £3,000 from the government in order to help them resettle abroad. This means that on a monthly basis, Labour has deported 2,712 migrants, which they claim is a 25% increase on the last 12 months' figures, which were of course the Conservative Party's figures. Again, all that sounds good. What's more, the policy of paying for resettlement schemes is something that nationalist groups have been advocating for decades, something that many within the mainstream laughed at, called racist, and claimed would never work. So this all goes to show that not only do nationalist policies work, but if those resettlement grants were coupled with other sensible policies, such as the requirement to speak English in order to use council services, a ban on ritually slaughtered meat, and a ban on face coverings in public places, many migrants would take the money and leave. Again, all this sounds very good, a positive step. But wait 1 second. Let's not get too excited too quickly. You see, I believe this is all a ploy to make people think that something is being done. And already the government are crowing, boasting of initiating the 4 biggest return charter flights in the UK's history. But this is the language a government uses when they want to reassure the public in order to take the pressure off without really solving the problem. But Mark, I hear you say, surely deporting 19,000 people is solving the problem. Well, yes and no. Scooping out a few buckets of water from the Titanic as it was sinking would technically be helping to solve the problem. But in effect, it wouldn't actually make any meaningful difference or alter the fate of the ship. And it's the same with this Labour policy. Firstly, it's important to note that there's estimated to be between 700,000 and 2 million illegal migrants living in Britain, with the media claiming that there's 585,000 illegal migrants living in London alone. What's more, there's also the issue of children born to illegal migrants, as estimates suggest that there are up to 144,000 children living in the UK whose parents arrived here illegally. If we take an estimate derived from the 2 aforementioned figures, for simplicity's sake, I have used an average, we come out with a figure of 1.35 million illegal migrants living in Britain. And working on that figure of 1.35 million and taking into account that Labour have been in power for 30 weeks, that means for each week they have been in power, Labour has deported 633 migrants, or 0.047% of the illegal migrants living in Britain. In total, in 30 weeks, Labour has deported 1.4% of the illegal migrants living here. So at this rate, it would take Labour over 41 years to deport them all. And that doesn't take into account their children that were born here. And there's another problem, just a small one. You see, I said firstly earlier, meaning that logically there would be other points to follow. And there is. You see, secondly, there is the issue that around 52,000 illegal migrants are estimated to come to Britain each year, which I am sure is a lowballed figure. But let's work with it, as it's an easy figure that works out at 1,000 migrants per week. This means that over Labour's 30-week tenure, one would assume that around 30,000 illegal migrants have entered Britain, which is over 11,000 more than Labour claimed to have deported. So not only would it take Labour over 41 years to deport all the illegal migrants living in Britain, but over that period, a further 2,142,857 migrants would enter Britain illegally unless something changes in terms of border control. So all that seems bad, right? Well, it's about to get much, much worse. So far, we have only dealt with illegal immigration, but illegal migration is dwarfed by legal migration. At the end of last year, Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister, revealed that 1.3 million people came to Britain legally in 2023, with net migration reaching a record high of 906,000. So legally, 17,423 people came to Britain each week in 2023, meaning that in just over a week, more people come here legally and remain in the country than Labour has deported in 30 weeks. Now let's add the legal and illegal figures, giving a total of 958,000, meaning that in total 18,423 migrants come to Britain per week, making Labour's deportation of 633 people per week seem minuscule in comparison. Labour may have deported 19,000 illegals, which is already lower than the number of illegal migrants coming in for that period, but when legal migration is added to the mix, the 19,000 figure becomes so small it almost becomes meaningless. The fact is, pictures of illegal migrants being led onto planes, talk of the 4 largest return flights to have ever been chartered by a British government, and numbers like 19,000 being thrown around, which to the man on the street seem big, are nothing more than political posturing. The level of migration we are witnessing is so large and the numbers so swamping that simply sending back a few hundred illegal migrants per week is the equivalent of using a couple of buckets in order to try and prevent the Titanic from sinking. White Britons are rapidly headed to minority status, and the Labour Party are merely trying to convince the public that they are doing something about the problem in order to lull people into a false sense of security.